Going to give everybody about 30 seconds to get into their seats, and then we'll begin. Nous sommes le Subcommittee des droits
We are the
étrangères et de développement.
For the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today, the 8th of December 2011, is our 14th session.
That we are televised, so keep that in mind. You're always on camera. We have today as a witness Colonel Wesley Smith, retired Colonel Wesley Smith of the United States Army, to talk to us further in our study of the situation in Camp Ashraf. Colonel Martin was the commandant of the camp and had additional experience in Iraq and as well as in other areas, and is in a position to provide us with considerable light on this subject. So without further ado, Colonel Martin, I'll turn things over to you. What we'll do is allow you to make a presentation, and then we'll take questions depending on the length of your opening statement. That will determine the length of the questions. We hope to give every member of the subcommittee a chance to ask you at least one question prior to wrapping things up. Please feel free to begin.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate it. If I start to get close to the 10 minutes, anybody please come up and just slap me on the back of the head, and I'll respond accordingly. I do appreciate the opportunity to address with you the situation in Camp Ashraf, Iraq, and with the former National Liberation Army of the Mujahideen, the MEK. Before I proceed, there is one thing I feel is very important and must be stated up front. As the first force protection and anti-terrorism officer for all coalition forces in Iraq, as the former operations officer for Task Force 134 detention operations, and as the first colonel to command Camp Ashraf, I cannot say with enough emphasis that the MEK is not a terrorist organization. Matter of fact, I found just the opposite when I was especially the camp commander of Camp Ashraf. They were my ally. President Obama has announced the removal of all U.S. troops from Iraq by the end of the year, minus the embassy security detail. The President has received criticism for leaving Iraq in a very dangerous situation. In fairness to the President, he had no choice. Iraqi Prime Minister Maliki's requirement for U.S. forces to be subject to Iraqi law is unacceptable. Maliki knew this when he set the standard. Maliki and his ally, Muqtada Sadr, want American forces out of Iraq so the consolidation of power can be completed. In the end, the final outcome of the coalition force invasion of Iraq is to replace one brutal regime with another, this time aligned with Iran. As we are aware, last April there was a brutal attack on Camp Ashraf that was well documented in a video. I hope everybody has had a chance to see the video. If not, I would request and recommend to take a look. Viewing the video, we witness unarmed people being run over by American-made military vehicles and being gunned down in cold blood by Iraqi soldiers. There is something else that warrants our notice and respect. Ashraf residents are rushing to the aid of their fallen comrades, braving the bullets in the vehicles, knowing they may be the next to die. Having worked with the Iranian Mujahideen, I see something further. I see the people who I served beside. And I recognize that if either myself or the American warriors with me at Ashraf had been under such an attack, the residents of Ashraf would have been rushing equally fast to our rescue. Although unarmed, they were on my flank, and I was honored to have them there. Yet my own government lists them as terrorists. Ironically, Muqtada Sadr's Mahdi Army and Khomeini's Quds Force are not listed as terrorists. We hear the rumors about the MEK. We are told they are a cult, they are Marxist-Leninists, they are people held there against the will, they attack the Kurds, they have American blood on their hands, and they supported Saddam, among other things. Detractors take and twist the information back to 1965 and the founding of the MEK. But they never go back to 1953 with the CIA-backed overthrow of the Iranian government and placing the Shah in power. Hopefully we have time to address these accusations in detail. Last February, Ambassador Jeffrey testified to Senators Levin and McCain that he was certain that Maliki would keep his word and protect the residents of Ashraf. Maliki's forces had already attacked Ashraf once. 2 months later came the April attack. As we speak here, Maliki has Ashraf residents under continuous psychological torture with loudspeakers, denying residents sleep while forcing them to listen to messages of pending doom. Logistics and medical support are being denied from entering the camp. The victims of the attacks with open wounds and broken limbs must endure the pain with no sedatives or medicines to prevent infection. Last month, in writing, Maliki stated his intentions to the European Union. A copy of that document is provided with my testimony. The United Nations have recognized the residents of Ashraf as applicants for refugee status, but Maliki has blocked any actions from taking place, just as he blocked Congressman Rohrabacher's delegation from visiting Ashraf. One major tool he continually uses to justify his actions is the terrorist designation. Maliki has stated that Camp Ashraf will be emptied of the Mujahideen al-Khalq by the end of the year. He has already renamed the compound Camp New Iraq. Should Maliki be allowed to overrun Camp Ashraf and transport the survivors back to Iran, where they will face the prison and the gallows, the fight for democracy in Iran will take a severe blow. It will not die any more than the cause for liberty in Texas died at the Alamo. Ashraf will become a rallying call. Remember Ashraf. Eventually, democracy will come to Iran. Iranian citizens are too wired into modern technology and Western communications for progress to be permanently denied. Unlike the Western world, the Middle East did not have 4 centuries to go through an age of exploration, religious reformation, great awakening, and the Industrial Revolution. They're getting it all at once. They will come out of it. Iran will one day be a democracy. The question is, what role will the Western world have in that? Right now, it is not looking good. The residents of Ashraf need to be pulled from Iraq as soon as possible. Many people have called upon Maliki to end the 31 December deadline and allow UNHCR representatives into the camp so they can complete their work on relocating the residents. Until that time, peacekeeping forces need to be on the ground with them. That stated, I don't believe Maliki is going to wait until the 31st of December to attack Ashraf for the final time. I predict he will attack any time after December 15th. His attacks in 2009, 2011 immediately followed visits with the U.S. Defense Secretary Gates. Next week, he visits with President Obama. The sooner he does it following his return from the United States, the more he can make it appear as a U.S. government-sanctioned operation. Unfortunately, we entered Iraq without a good understanding of the region. We have replaced one brutal regime with another. This time, the government is becoming more and more aligned with Iran. Khomeini once stated, the road to Jerusalem is through Kabbalah. We have played a critical role in opening the passage. We've made a lot of mistakes, and many people have paid the ultimate price for those mistakes. Unless positive steps are taken very quickly, 3,400 residents of Camp Ashraf will be the next to pick up the tab. Thank you for this invitation to speak, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Colonel Martin. We'll begin with a questioner from the government side. Given the time, it's now 15:15. I think we can get away with having 7-minute rounds, but I'm going to be pretty abrupt in cutting them off to make sure we stick to that. If we do that, we should have enough time. And it's Mr. Hebert, please.
Sure. Thank you, Colonel. I really appreciate your testimony here. It's nice to have somebody who's been on the ground and seen it firsthand, and you've clearly done that. In your testimony, you talked about the arguments that others make. You briefly commented about that they have been identified as a cult, as former terrorists, Saddam supporters. Can you just, for the benefit of our committee, go over all of the arguments that have been made to buttress the case that they should be listed as a terrorist organization, and address those concerns for our committee?
Okay.
So address the concerns that have been raised, and what's your perspective on those concerns?
The first one that we should probably raise is the founding of the MEC. That's what people like to go to and call it a Marxist-Leninist organization. The MEC was founded in 1965 by a group of students that did some study. And what they came up with was There should be equality between the leaders and those being led. Clerics should not have final say over the interpretation of the Quran, and clerics should not expect blind obedience from the congregation. Okay, that does sound like Marx and Lenin, but that also sounds like Jefferson and Madison in the writing of our own Declaration of Independence and our own Constitution. And also, Ronald Reagan would not have had any problems with those three philosophies. And I think we can all agree Ronald Reagan was no communist. And so when they say, well, they're Marxist-Leninist, no, the original Mujahideen was not. There was a split that came in the 70s when there were actually two Mujahideens at that time. There was a Marxist Mujahideen and there was the People's Mujahideen of Iran. And they were fighting each other as much as they were fighting the Shah's brutal government. That's where we get into the comment about there's American blood on Mujahideen hands. Colonels Schaefer, Turner, and Hawkins were not killed by the organization represented by Miriam Rajavi and by the National Liberation Army people, former National Liberation Army people of Ashraf that we know today. Two of the people that had killed Schaefer and Turner were captured by the Shah's police, and they confessed that they were from the Marxist Mujahideen. The person who killed Hawkins later wrote that he was the one who did it, and he was Marxist. And the same thing went for the three contractors. Yesterday, in front of Congress, the State Department representative ignored this long-known knowledge that there were two Mujahideens, and he blamed Miriam Rajavi's organization. And then later, Ambassador Bloomfield pointed out, no, that was not the case. We move to the fact of being a cult. One of the accusations that came out recently is Miriam Rajavi is a very charismatic leader. This is true. She is very professional in her approach. She has people like her style, and they are very, very loyal to her. But I have watched Miriam Rajavi viewing the videotapes of the massacre at Camp Ashraf. And even though she's had to review it many times, I saw the wincing in her eyes, and I saw the uncomfortable feeling when she was watching people being killed. Cult leaders don't feel pain every time they see one of their people being killed. So I could see the loyalty that people have in the MEK towards her. She has, she has that same loyalty to them, and you don't find that in cults. One of the comments made, especially at Camp Ashraf, well, they wear all the same clothing. But we are talking about the National Liberation Army. Of course, all armies wear the same clothing. But now the men do not wear all the same clothing. They wear civilian-type clothing because the National Liberation Army does not exist anymore. Then comes the issue, well, they divorced and they live separately of each other. Considering what's going through with the MEK right now at Camp Ashraf, it's a good thing, and Masood Rajavi saw the intensity of the problem and the fight ahead. And if he had a bunch of children to deal with all these pending attacks and things that were going on, it would make the problem even more complicated. And we're fortunate there are no children at Camp Ashraf. We're talking late teenagers, maybe. One of the young ladies killed, as shown in the video, was 20 years old. But that is pretty much the younger part of it. And Jesuit priests don't marry, but we don't call them a cult. So when we start peeling back the different accusations against them, they pretty much start falling apart. Unfortunately, we have seen cases where no matter what you say, It's almost like the old Simon and Garfunkel song, The Boxer. A man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. And that's some of the things that we're facing. Also, they're being accused, well, they supported Saddam. Congressman Fillmore yesterday pointed out, and so did the United States, during that time in the 1980s, when Iran and Iraq were slugging it out in the late 70s, the United States was supporting Saddam. And Congressman Fillmore then said to the State Department representative, does that mean we're also terrorists? So when we start peeling them back, they fall apart. There's another rumor they're being held against their will. I would go through all the compounds and shake when I would visit with them. And sometimes those visits did not have much notice to the PMOI. And I'll explain one in a minute. And I would shake the hands of as many people as possible. And if they wanted to leave, they could hold the hand. And all we had to do is walk out. Also, we had 2 written agreements. The MEC, the MEK, did not want to keep people who wanted to leave. And they used the same philosophy that was used just the night before the Battle of Kabbalah. We will dim the fires. We will put the lights out. If anybody wanted to leave, they could. And we had a facility set up for them to come to. And again, we had 2 written agreements to go ahead and accept them. And the last rumor to address, and this was the one of the many I ended up debunking myself, I got a message from State Department. I had just returned from Germany, and the MEK had a training site on the compound, and it was at this exact location. And they were recruiting Iraqis at that time to be in it. I ordered my Marines to mount up, and we were ready to go straight to that compound. And one of the liaison officers said, Colonel, you're welcome to go to any of our compounds anytime you want. You don't need to bring your Marines and force your way in. I said, okay, tell you what, I'm bringing 1 lieutenant with me, and we're going to that compound now. And if what State Department has told me is true, the rest of the Marines are coming. We went to the compound, and what we found is it was a training site. Now, excuse me. Now I'm getting confused. It was a site where workers were living, and they hired a lot of local labor. The local labor would come in on Monday, and they'd work through the week. If they came and left every night and came back next morning, they had greater chances on one of the real terrorist organizations, Al-Qaeda, Badr, Mahdi Army, catching them and executing them. So for their own safety, they had a lodging arrangement set up. And I went through, and there weren't hundreds. There was somewhere between 50 and 80 at the most. I went through every building in that compound, except one, and now I'm walking out, and the liaison officer said, Colonel, you haven't checked this building yet. I said, I've seen enough. I know what is not going on here. He said, Colonel, would you do me a favor and check the building? So I went and checked the building, and sure enough, it was just where workers were being allowed to live safely so that they weren't putting themselves at greater risk. They weren't putting themselves at 5 times the risk. And if they had anything to hide, he wouldn't have said, Colonel, would you check the other building? I came back feeling totally stupid that the State Department report had got me into mounting up my Marines and ready to make a crash into a compound. I learned a lot that night.
We have to go to our next question. Mr. Marston, please.
Well, thank you. And Colonel, I really appreciate hearing your testimony because it's matching testimony we've previously heard. One of the things that came up here that you've indicated very early on in your remarks is the heavy influence that Iran now has in this area. And when we go back to the MEK and we go back to the revolution and how you were referring to the students at that point in time, and it was basically, in my understanding, a student-led revolution that got hijacked by the clerics in Iran. And do you see a division along tribal lines, the tribes of Iran aligned with their own tribes in Iraq? Is it following that kind of a path, sir?
From what I have seen, it's not tribal in Iran and Iraq, but it is, at this point in time, religious. And at this point in time, a lot of opportunists. And I'll drop back to my role as the anti-terrorism officer for all of Iraq. The United States, before it invaded, first off, our State Department had paid Chalabi $33 million to provide information on Saddam Hussein and his weapons of mass destruction and his other great technologies. Defense Intelligence Agency had also provided him double-digit millions. Basically, Chalabi made about $100 million off the American taxpayer to give us misinformation. Then the State Department had Chalabi go to Tehran and make sure it was okay with them for us to invade Iraq and bring down Saddam Hussein. Well, of course it was. But one of the conditions the State Department received and the American government received is to also attack the Mujahideen al-Khalq. Now, moving on, as the American forces and the British forces moved in, the Iranians, and I saw this personally, was setting up, and they already had Hakim's Badakor and Hakim's Securities, the Supreme Council Islamic Revolution in Iraq. They were already established in the country. So as we went through dropping Saddam's forces, and they disappeared on us, with the exception of the Fedayeen in Nasiriyah. As his rule was dropping, I came to realize when I got there that the Iranian government had come up and started replacing the governments. We talk about the Fallujah Triangle, basically from Tikrit down to Fallujah over to Baghdad. I developed another expression, and that was the Iranian wedge that I was witnessing. It was from Al-Qut to An-Najaf, Al-Qut to Daiwanir, to An-Najaf, up to Kabbalah, and over to Al-Hilla and back. And I could see this great, it was almost like a tidal wave that was a struggle in that location at that time. And Daiwanir was really the center of gravity because the tribal chief there was determined we're not coming under the control of Iran. And he was also not coming under the control of Al-Qaeda. And he mobilized his tribe to try to secure the city. Unfortunately, that success fell. But that was the main area I was having to deal with the Iranian influence as the anti-terrorism officer. Then I came back to the States, and then I was by name request to go back to Iraq to be the J3 of detention operations. And I started seeing now the influence has jumped from Iran through Baghdad, and it was now being struggled in the Diyala province. And what the Iran was pushing for, if the country fell, and it went into three sectors, Kurdistan up north, and then the Al-Anbar province would end up probably going to Saudi Arabia, and the Iranians wanted to gather as much as they could in the rest of Iraq, the Shia areas. And Diyala was really the fight, because in the 1920s, Baghdad only had about 20% Shia population. By the time we arrived, it had jumped to 50. And that part was in part because of the Industrial Revolution, but in part because Karim Kazem, the general who took control of the government from the monarchy from 58 to 63, really wanted to do good things. And he saw great poverty, so he built what is now Sada City. It used to be Kazem City, then Saddam City. So by the time I came back, that Shia population had pretty well taken control of a lot of the Baghdad area. Now we were finding they were going after the Diyala province. Also what we found, and I had to deal with this several times, in one case in particular, we got word that the Iraqi Ministry of Interior, which was a very corrupt organization, was moving their forces into villages, and telling the village people, you got 1 hour to clear.
Could I interrupt you for a moment, sir, if I could, because I'd like to come back a little more towards Camp Ashraf.
Sure.
And one of the concerns that came through in the testimony we had here, and it left me with the feeling that that there was an orchestrated campaign to malign them. And the second thing that came through was we were astounded by the number of American officials who were saying they had to be protected, and how the government in the U.S. just seems to be ignoring a plethora of people across the board who understand the situation, understand the gravity and the risk to these people. And I hate to say this, but it almost sounds like the U.S. government's prepared to sacrifice them.
I smile with a feeling of pain almost, but I am very pleased that you've totally captured it. Let me hit the second point first. The people who are speaking out. Tom Ridge, the former Homeland Security Director, is saying there was not a single document that came across my desk during my tenure. Louis Freeh, the former FBI Director, Louis told me himself, when I was in charge of the FBI, State Department tried to get my organization involved in blessing that terrorist designation, and I refused. John Sano, former CIA Director, has personally told me, and I've been with him when he's publicly stated, the Mujahideen al-Khalq was not a terrorist organization, and it was wrong. Then you move to all these other generals. You got 3 former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You got Wesley Clark. You got former Commandant of the Marine Corps, Jim Conway.
If I might jump in again, sir, because we've heard the testimony, the list of names here.
Right.
And at one point or other, because of the invasion of Iraq and the stories that many people felt were built up about weapons of mass destruction that people believed were there and others did not believe they were there, and the evidence seemed to support them. It almost feels like the MEK has got sideswiped by the original campaign of misinformation that seemed to have come out of the Bush era. And the kind of shocking thing to me is that
question, because we're actually past your time limit.
Is how that seems to have carried over to the current administration.
Thank you. And that's a good point. And I've said publicly many times, and really where the problem I center down towards is the State Department. And I have said this State Department is serving Hillary Clinton no better than they served Colin Powell when they sent him to those weapons of mass destruction speeches. And the MEK did get sideswiped during this. And as you pointed out, all the disinformation towards them. And I pointed out all the rumors and everything else. And there has been a lot of disinformation. And a lot of it has been to please Iran. And I've yet to figure out why our State Department is so determined to please Iran. But they're doing it continually. And any rumor that Iran tells about the MEK is accepted as a fact, except the last one. And I was glad to see finally when the Codes Force was detected on planning to kill the Saudi ambassador inside a busy restaurant, and it was discovered. And the first thing was said by the Iranian government is, oh, that was that Mujahideen al-Khalq. And finally the United States came back and said, no, it wasn't. That was the first time that slander wasn't allowed. But at the same time, and I'll deviate for a second, our own State Department stumbled twice. They stumbled when they said, well, we need to figure out how high up the Iranian government this went. As the former anti-terrorism officer for all of Iraq, I can assure them, and I could have saved them some time, something of that magnitude would not have been planned had not Khomeini and Ahmadinejad personally approved it. And then the other thing, the State Department came out and said, we need to place Iran on increased diplomatic isolation. And Louis Freeh turned to me and says, what is that? And I said, I have a military police type sense of humor, and I said, somebody at State Department spent their college youth watching the movie Animal House, and now they want to put Iran on double secret probation. There was a third question you asked, sir, and
time for that one.
Time, but thank you, sir.
Okay.
Very comprehensive answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, we actually have time. Mr. Sweet, you're next. I may have to shorten the rounds. It looks like we're running out of time, but right now you've still got 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Colonel, just wanted to say thank you very much for your service. We appreciate the role that the Armed Forces play, certainly here in Canada, and I know that as a protector of the people of the United States of America, I'm certainly your people appreciate your service as well. You've mentioned entering you called it a compound, but Camp Ashraf, whatever, and to check regarding this abduction of Iraqi citizens. And could you just explain a little bit more? What was the nature of your exposure? Because of the experience that you've had as an anti-terrorist officer, how much exposure did you actually have these people? How much interaction, and for what period of time?
With the Mujahideen al-Khalq, it went over a period of the years. When I was the anti-terrorism officer, I went to the commanding general over all detention operations in October 2003 because I had a serious problem I had detected and I needed to talk to her about. And that was she had a total lack of adult supervision at Abu Ghraib. And she and I went through officer basic course together. During that conversation, and unfortunately nothing was done about what I had reported. You know what happened there. She and I talked in detail about the Mujahideen. And she said, I can't get people to understand they're not part of the problem, and they're a good source that we should be using both for information and as an ally. And we went over in great detail about what they are. And I realized this is not a terrorist organization. So I was able to focus my attention on the other threats I mentioned earlier. Later, a report came in, they're building fighting positions up there. Okay, I checked into that one along with Major General Tom Miller. What we immediately realized and found out with digging it, they weren't building fighting positions, they were building trenches, but they were building sewer and water trenches because of now the sudden increase of population, and it's a very sanitary organization, very sanitary base. So these were the type of rumors that we were putting out. Later, when I became the J3 of detention operations, the Mujahideen Camp Ashraf was one of our 5 camps. And I did pay attention to it there, and I was dealing with issues concerning it.
So would you be exposed to the people, the MEK folks, on a weekly basis?
When I became base commander, I was exposed to them on an hourly basis almost.
So could I ask you, I just want to make sure that we get your great expertise on that record. Has there been any other group of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people that's been able to fool you in your career, that all of a sudden after you, as under security, found out that they actually were terrorists when you thought they were innocent people?
I had individuals that have fooled me greatly, but as to an organization of that magnitude that I personally dealt with over that period of time, no.
Thank you, Colonel. We've also heard from sources that these folks have continue to this day to have to be armed.
Right.
And could you tell me, did you have exposure enough to check the camp? Were there hidden arms there? What's the situation with the MEK?
And you're correct, and I owe the gentleman beside you an apology. That's one rumor I forgot to mention. We did have those rumors. They were still armed. And I did have the ability to check all the camps, and even before I arrived, there were inspections of all the camps. And we had the rumors that, well, they had underground bunkers. Every time we debunked a rumor, then somehow, oh, then it must be this way, took place. The best evidence I can suggest that, one, not only my own inspections, but the fact that they were not armed was the 2009 and 2011 videos. And that is the fact that if they had arms, they would have gone and got them and at least come into this with a fighting chance. And that, and if I may, one other thing, them being held against their will, is those 2009, 2011 attacks proves they're not being held against their will, because what better time to escape than in the middle of an attack? And they didn't. They held firmly together. But no, they weren't armed.
Thank you, Colonel, because that was going to be my next question. In all of these manufactured opportunities that you gave them to leave. From what I understand, they could shake your hand for an extended period of time. The lights were out, and they could, walk away unmolested. Did anybody leave?
We not through shaking the hands. We did have another facility that had about 190 we referred to as defectors, and those were the two of the agreements. Julie Norman worked one just before I got there, and I worked a clarification of one. The people did leave. We had a couple walkaways. What the Ashraf leadership and I worked out, they didn't mind the people walking away. As a matter of fact, they tried to even give one to me that didn't want to come to us, but he didn't want to be with them anymore. He was living in a kind of a twilight zone where he had all the food, he had private lodging and everything else. But we did have some that come. The leadership, the only thing they wanted is to make sure they didn't come with documents and get debriefed before they go. And if they happen to come across, we worked out the situation where if the defector did not want to visit with the leadership again, I would personally counsel the guy, and then I would tell the leadership the results of the conversation. And they always took my word, and I never lied to him. He did not bring any documents. He doesn't want to see you again. And the leadership would accept that.
Colonel Martin, because my time is limited, I just want to make sure that I get as much as I can on the record. Could you tell me, in your opinion, what is going to happen to these 3,400 people when the time comes that they're going to shut down this camp?
That is the hardest of all. I have a philosophy: you beat the enemy, you feel good about it. He beats you, you live with it. We are about, if we don't do something different, we're about to live with their death, because they're going to be rolled up by Maliki. And we saw what was done in 2009, more brutal in 2011. And earlier I referenced the Alamo. Santa Ana attacked twice. Maliki's going to attack the third time. And it's going to be brutal. And the survivors are then going to be rolled up. And Maliki has already put out in the press, he's going to take them to Nasiriyah and to Samoa. And I believe it's maybe to the old Japanese camp, which is awesome camp. Both that could be used very effectively, not only keep people out, but keep people in. And then they're going to be processed for going to Iran. Maliki has not cooperated like he claims he has with the UNHCR. He has commitments to Ahmadinejad and Khomeini. And when he's attacked before, he's attacked with sawdust. And matter of fact, I need to mention this to emphasize my point. Maliki is not only Prime Minister, but he's maintained himself as the Minister of Defense and Minister of Interior, and he has 8 special brigades assigned to him, just like directly to him, to nobody else, even if he wasn't Minister of Defense. And he's going to use his forces, and he's going to use them brutal. Maliki also has secret prisons in his country. And they're all through. We used to go busting them all the time. And he had, I wish I had come out of Iraq with the meat hook we took out of one of his compounds. And on the 4th floor in the basement of the Ministry of Interior, he had secret detention facilities where people were being tortured. He is going to do the same thing to the Mujahideen. And then he's going to say, and he said it in the letter to the UN, I have tried to cooperate with you, but you're not cooperating. And the Mujahideen is being accused of not cooperating. And Madam Parsai, the leader, is willing to cooperate with us any way possible with reasonable means. And this thing about, well, we want to take him out of Ashraf to put him somewhere else. They have their logistical support there. They have everything else they need, and they're supporting themselves, life support. By taking them somewhere else, you break them up. It's divide and conquer. It's going to be brutal.
Next questioner would be Professor Kotler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too want to express, as my colleagues have done, our appreciation for having decorated a colonel who's been on the ground and can come here and share with us the experience and expertise as you have today. Colonel, when I look at your testimony, which sort of graphically describes, as you said, the video wasn't much for the killings in Ashraf, then the denial of logistical and medical relief for those who've been suffering from previous attacks, and then the reference to the ongoing harassment and intimidation. But the thing that stood out for me in all your testimony is the likelihood that Maliki will attack after December 15th, because in two previous situations, with regard to 2009 and 2011, the attacks came after meetings with Defense Minister Gates at the time. Now, as you mentioned, he will be meeting with Obama, and that he is likely to launch that attack after that meeting with Obama, and then make it appear as if the U.S. was part of a government-sanctioned attack. The thing that I have to say that I find sort of, I don't know what word to use with regard to this, as almost shocking, is how a United States government, and a powerful government, who undertook the protection of Ashraf from 2003 to 2009, handed it over to Maliki. I assume either assurances were received for their protection, or that at least they should have asked for that assurances. I'm not know. But U.S. would be said to have a continuing type of obligation here. Shouldn't in the United States, the alarm be sounded in advance of that meeting with Obama, so that Maliki can't come out of that meeting and launch such an attack, because the United States will have been publicly forewarned by the people whom you've mentioned, you know, with the kind of expertise and respect that they enjoy, whether it be Tom Ridge, whether it be Louis Freeh, whether it be Michael McAfee, whether it be yourself. I mean, here are people, you know, at the highest level of American decision-making with that kind of experience and expertise, re-Ashraf. How is it that the alarm can't be sounded so that Obama, instead of just meeting with Maliki, will, even before the meeting, make it clear what are the consequences should Maliki ever decide to attack, and prevent that type of thing from occurring?
Sir, that is an excellent question. Also, yesterday at congressional hearings with Congressman Rothbacher, those same issues were brought up. And Congresswoman Sheila Jackson pointed out to the State Department that she feels that that condition that you just described should be set down, and if it is not made clear to Maliki and Maliki accepts it, then the President does not meet with Maliki. And the United States Congress has taken on the same exact quest that you mentioned. You also mentioned the written agreement, sir. Here is the packet of all the protected person status agreements that was processed, and the personal folders, and to show the protected person card of all these people. And these are the people who were executed in the 2009 and 2011. And they had real names, they had real faces, they had real lives, and protected person status. The protected person status was revoked, and the lives were taken from them. And I'm more than willing to pass the packet around, although in 2009 it includes the photos of the bodies, and it is hideous. One with a man's face caved in by a forklift. You had mentioned the surrender. Some people are trying to play with words and saying, well, they didn't surrender, they surrendered their weapons. A warrior only needs two things to fight and engage the enemy: a weapon and ammunition. He can do it without food, water, sleep, a whole bunch of stuff. But he cannot fight and engage without weapon and ammunition. When they renounced terrorism, which was a formality in my opinion, because they weren't terrorists, but they renounced it, they surrendered their weapons, and they did surrender all their weapons, and we assured them protected person status. No one despises war more than the warrior, and no one despises the violation of a condition of surrender, whether it's the weapon or the person, than the warrior who worked to secure it and who enforced it. And to have our bureaucratic executive branch of government come in and say, we ignore that now, and by the way, we're turning you over to the friend of your enemies. That was wrong.
Colonel, it seems to me that nobody can say that we do not know what has happened already to the residents of Camp Ashraf, and equally that nobody can say at this point that we cannot foresee what will happen to the residents of Camp Ashraf. And I think your testimony today is yet another, compelling warning of the need to act urgently to prevent this disaster from occurring. And I have to say that while I believe we here in Canada as parliamentarians have to join in the sounding of the alarm and doing whatever we can with respect to this almost responsibility to prevent and protect, I still believe that it is the United States that has both the capacity, the principal responsibility, and I would hope will undertake the necessary action. And what you've just said, read the congressional testimony, that either Obama gets a clear and express undertaking that can be sanctioned, or he should not meet with Maliki and put Maliki on notice that he will be held accountable, criminally responsible for that which will occur. And I think that the U.S. could refer the matter even to the UN Security Council for reference at that point to the ICC if need be.
Sir, your comments are totally on target, and I agree with you 100%. And to show you how much Maliki is actually behind this, this is the magazine of his political party. The center article is titled MEC Organization, International Terrorist from Previous Dictatorship and the Depth of Western Hypocrisy. And it goes on to blast not only the Mujahideen al-Khalq, but it blasts the West, Europe and North America. And the Iraqis rely on the fact that most Americans do not read Arabic, and I don't. But they also rely on most Americans are not pursuing this kind of information. And it's wrong on my nation's part. And you're right, we have the internet, we have the responsibility. They surrendered. These are American signatures on these documents. And my job was to enforce the agreements of my predecessors. That's why I took a loyalty towards this, and we did enforce, and the MEK worked closely with me. I also have the documentation where they supplied us with water and other resources. Like I said, they were an ally. We also, in the United States, because we're drawing down from Iraq and we're drawing down soon from Afghanistan, we have the resources in the United States to house the MEK. The Base Realignment Commission has gone through and identified a lot of sources. And my old command headquarters in Albuquerque, New Mexico could easily fit 500 of them. And it's got the shower facilities, it's got kitchen facilities, plenty of room to rest, and it's already fenced in. We have the facilities in the United States. The problem is convincing our government to do it.
Thank you, Colonel. Again, your testimony is very much appreciated.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We are actually just a few minutes away from our closing time, so I think we're going to have to dramatically reduce the questions. We have one left each for the Conservatives and the Democrats. Let's, and I apologize for this to the members, but let's keep it down. We'll make it about 3 minutes. So, Ms. Grewal, please, and then Mr. Chisholm. Mr. Heber, please.
I know that on occasion this committee has extended its time and seen the clock as something other than it was. Is that an option for us at this stage?
Well, we never see the clock as different than it is. The clock is what we say it is, but that remains an option now, as always. I won't see the clock as being 2 o'clock until I get an indication from the committee that that ought to be the time we see it as.
The testimony is so valuable. I think we should extend the period of time we have for this committee to hear it.
All right, we'll make sure of that. So maybe we'll give you, I still can't give you the full 7, but maybe we'll give you 4 there, Ms. Grewal, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Colonel for your time and your presentation, and thank you for your service. Colonel, are you able to estimate the percentage of residents of Camp Ashraf that have been likely been involved in terrorist activities? Could you please tell?
Could I have the question repeated?
Are you able to estimate the percentage of Camp Ashraf residents that are involved in any type of terrorist activities?
I can vouch for every one of those residents. There are only 2 people in Camp Ashraf that were in the PMOI at the time of the killings of the Americans back in the 1970s. And as I mentioned, it wasn't even their organization. But those two people, I can say their name right now, but the problem is when it gets televised, the Iranian intelligence agency is going to work. And I'm already fearful I'm about to lose 3,400 friends and allies, and I don't want to put their names up top. The rest of them, I've been in the field of combat with them. We've taken an IED together. And if I ever had a problem with the MEK, it was this. They wanted to put themselves between us and danger. And that violated our procedures. We had the guns, we had the armored vehicles. They did not. I remember one day I had to counsel a group of them because as soon as the convoy stopped, they went out first. And I hauled them back. I said, you let my soldiers clear this area before you go out. And they said, yes, sir, you're right. I can personally vouch. They're not terrorists. And I have, as you can see, I have studied that organization and the environment around it. And it's appalling that we're using this designation because when the designation was originally assigned what constitutes a terrorist, it took three things. They had to be foreign, they had to be capable and have the intent to attack the United States or its citizens. The MEK has not done that, and this thing is supposed to be reviewed and updated every 2 years. Well, after they surrendered their weapons, even if they had been terrorists, after they surrendered their weapons and started working close with the Americans, then they certainly weren't terrorists. And to say, oh, well, they did this years ago. Well, Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat both were self-proclaimed terrorists. And within 30 years of being self-proclaimed terrorists, jointly they won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Colonel, and in your opinion, how could a durable solution be achieved for the residents of Camp Ashraf, and what would such a solution look like?
The solution, I think, that needs to happen, the United States needs to go in with 6 or 7 Airbuses to Balad, which is 20 miles from Camp Ashraf, and have the residents of Camp Ashraf grab 1 bag each, and this is be prearranged. You're allowed to take 1 bag each and bring it out, and then you moved, and they do have to come across the Tigris. They'd have to be lifted by chopper or go by a longer route. You have to be lifted out and bring them out and bring them to the United States. We have facilities. We've done it in Guam with refugees. We have other places, as I mentioned. Short of that, we need to allow the UNHCR time to do the refugee status review. My fear of doing that in Iraq, it's only a matter of time before this government becomes more corrupt and becomes more under the control of Muqtada Sadr. And I use the example, and I don't think I mentioned the death of Saddam Hussein yet, have I?
Colonel, in your opinion, if the residents...
Let him finish.
Oh,
Okay. And sir, for going over the time on the questions, I'm at fault. I'm the guilty one.
That was mainly meant to restrain our members, not to restrain you.
But I take total guilt because I keep going on. Muqtada Sadr informed his followers that Saddam will not live to see the light of a new year. He informed Maliki, I want Saddam turned over to me tomorrow morning. Maliki contacted the commanding general of Task Force 134. Why do you want him tomorrow? We're already planning to execute him on the 10th of January. I want him tomorrow. Why? Show me how you've got this set up in an organized manner. I want him tomorrow. The Task Force 134 Detention Operations Commander pushed back and says, no, this is going to be a fiasco. Our State Department weighed in, influenced his military leadership, and told him directly, you will turn him over. The commanding general then had no choice. He turned him over, and you remember the fiasco that became. And the State Department immediately backed up and let the commanding general take all the blame. They never, not one person in the State Department stepped forward and says, we were the ones who ordered it to happen. And I see an identical situation happening with Camp Ashraf as that country, it's going further down, with the exception of Kurdistan, who is actually, that is actually becoming very productive. They have malls there, they're developing bridges, they're developing businesses. With the exception of Kurdistan, Iraq is going severely down further and further every day. Demonstrations in Talas Square are being brutally suppressed, and it just keeps on going. The people themselves, even the Shias in Najaf, Nasiriyah, Basra, are now saying it was actually better under Saddam.
Any time left?
No, I'm afraid not. We have to go to our next questioner, which is Mr. Chisholm.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Colonel. I've certainly found your testimony very interesting. But getting to the question of what gets done and does it get done in time, you've indicated that the concerns that have been expressed seem to be falling on deaf ears in the United States. Would you give me some indication of whether what the options are if the U.S. is not going to listen and not going to act? Is there any opportunity of the UN being able to intervene? And is there anything that Canada can do to try to force this question?
With the UN, there is. And Tom Ridge has said it probably more than anybody else, is we need to get blue helmets on the ground. And I am more than willing to go with that operation. We need to get the UN even more engaged in trying to protect the people, as I just mentioned. The UNHCR is trying to move. We need to break down Maliki's walls, artificial walls, on cooperating with him, which he hasn't done. On Canada, and I've talked personally with Maryam Rajavi with this, Italy has accepted some of the MEK members. If Canada would be willing to accept MEK members, to include, and I know you would include, some Canadian citizens that's in the MEK. I remember one young lady over there, her name I've long forgotten, that was a Canadian citizen, as was her brother. Her brother came back home. If they would accept some of the members, to make it clear and help push back the 31 December deadline, although, as I've mentioned, I don't trust Maliki unless he's put under great pressure to even honor that deadline, let alone push it back. But what can be done to go ahead and push it back? And I know you're out of the cycle of revising your terrorist list, but I would greatly encourage if the MEC could be moved off the terrorist list in Canada. That would help. One, it could be used, okay, United States, your United Kingdom has said they're not terrorists, European Union has stated they're not terrorists, and now your ally to the north has stated they're not terrorists. It would help force the issue.
Are we in fact, I mean, you talked about the deadline of December the 31st, but are we not in fact looking at a deadline much closer than that if Obama is going in to have a meeting on the 15th, given what's happened in 2009, 2011?
Yes, sir. And that's why, and you're right, as I pointed out. And when I was the anti-terrorism officer of Iraq, I used to have to sometimes examine the facts, look at the history, as you've just pointed out, and also make some gut-feeling calls. Like one day when General Sanchez stopped me outside the office and said, "What's going on?" I said, "Sir, Diwanir is next." And sure enough, they got hit. And we went over what I was doing to help try to do the defenses down there. My gut feeling, based upon everything I am looking at, Maliki is going to move before December 31st and as close to December 15th. So as pointed out here, and as Sheila Jackson pointed out yesterday, to make it clear that you don't get to meet the president. And also, by the way, this meeting that Joe Biden had over there, and then Joe Biden comes back and says great things, and he also says the Iranian influence is greatly exaggerated. No, it's not. It's underestimated. And if I may close, one of the greatest humanitarian warriors is no stranger to any of you. He wrote a very special piece in a letter, and I think everybody has seen this, but if you don't mind, if I can read. The threat to the residents of Camp Ashraf is real and imminent. Within over a month, these 3,400 unarmed citizens will face a potentially mortal crisis unless the international community fulfills its own moral and legal obligations. The humanitarian crisis is avoidable and must be avoided at all costs.
Thank you very much, Colonel.
Sir, thank you.
Thank you, Colonel. With the permission of the committee, I'd like to ask a question of my own. This is just with relation to the technical question of the status of protected persons. I gather this is a status that is awarded under the Geneva Conventions. Is that correct?
It was. Yes, sir.
So who actually makes the decision to give you protected person status? What body does that?
In this particular case, it was done by Rumsfeld. What happened, as I know everybody is aware, normally in a situation like that, as soon as the military operations ceased, the State Department would go in and start building the government. And Colin Powell did have a very extensive plan for building Iraq. But Rumsfeld, through his influence to President Bush, refused to allow that control to go over the State Department. And as a result, Bremer was sent over, and all the decisions were handled for a long time through the Department of Defense. So in this particular case, in this particular case, it ended up being made by Rumsfeld. Normally, I believe it would be done by the State Department.
Okay. And so when we talk about the protected person status being revoked, that has actually happened in a formal way, has it, or has it not happened?
It happened formally?
Yeah. Has their protected person status formally been revoked, or is it?
It was.
It was. And who was that by, do you know?
And that would have been by the State Department at that time. And let me leave it at that. It would have been done by the State Department.
Okay. I don't need a precise answer. That gives me just some familiarity with an issue with which I wasn't familiar. All right. Well, we very much appreciate your testimony, Colonel. It's been a real honor having you here. Very illuminating. And I think we're all very appreciative of that. Thanks very much.
Sir, I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
I do have, for the rest of the committee, one item of business relating to our hearings next week. In order to accommodate some scheduling issues, we will now be hearing from the folks from the Foreign Affairs Department on the issue of Camp Ashraf on Tuesday, and we will be hearing from the witnesses regarding the Democratic Republic of Congo on Monday. So that shift will occur. Timing doesn't change, just who we're hearing from on which day. That's the only item. Professor Kotler.
Mr. Chairman, I think a notice of motion was distributed regarding North Korea. I think we heard testimony. I think people here are knowledgeable about it. I'm bringing it up now because the Council for Human Rights in North Korea is meeting in Toronto tomorrow evening. I was very much hoping that they could be able to announce that this committee had adopted these motions. They were once previously even brought forward by Mr. Hebert, and then the matter lapsed.
Perhaps what we'll do is we'll just allow these to be distributed. Then we'll see if there's a consensus on their adaptation. Or adoption, I should say. I wonder if I could ask, we're still in session here, and we're now dealing with a different item. Could I ask everybody to just take a peek at these?
Colleagues, I'm just distributing a motion in North Korea that Russ had earlier been involved with. That I was asked by Count Lee from Toronto, because the Council for Human Rights in North Korea is meeting tomorrow evening. They would like to announce that our committee, after we had heard the witness testimony, adopted this motion, which is based on the witness testimony, even based on what Mr. Hebert's work was, which lapsed, from the last Parliament. So I'm basically restating what was done at their request. and their hope that we could pass it today so that they could announce it at their meeting tomorrow evening.
Maybe we'll just give people a moment to absorb. While we're doing that, Professor Kotler, one of these was submitted by Mr. Hebert earlier, or just the subject matter of it?
I think we heard testimony, and I think Mr. Hebert wanted to move the motion, but I don't believe he ever got around to doing it, unless...
No, this is on North Korea.
Oh, in the previous Parliament?
Yeah.
Fair enough. Yes, that's true. I did bring forward a motion to that effect. I don't see a problem with this.
Yeah, it's basically the same.
All right, let's do this in the proper fashion then. We'll take the one of the motions. This is the one that begins with the statement, whereas the subcommittee has heard graphic and compelling testimony, etc. No, they don't. That one's different. That one, is there a consensus to adopt that one? All right. And the other one, is there a consensus to adopt that one? I should ask that question at debate. I'll just find out though. Just a second. I go for the old-fashioned kind of multi-party consensus.
Chairman, how long ago was this testimony? Because I apologize, with so many cases that we deal with, I don't recall any of the details from this.
Mr.
Goes back to February last year, before that even.
This is these are the, I do recall this testimony. I can't remember any more about the exact details, but I certainly remember the general gist of the testimony.
Mr. Chair, I'll never forget the testimony. It was so graphic. This woman talking about how she saw people murdered in front of her while she was in North Korea. She tried to get to China twice, made it once successfully. People were eating each other. I mean, it was just horrific. Just for clarification,
for what is being done here, so I want to credit him with that.
Just to clarify, the second motion that we're discussing, Ms. Shin Suk-ja and her two daughters.
Right.
Can you just remind me of who they are in the context?
Well, they've been, they're held in North Korea. We don't know if they're still alive. The situation is considered to be one of urgency to determine, if they're alive, their whereabouts, bring about their release because of this ongoing arbitrary that they've been imprisoned, in that notorious camp that you spoke about then, the Kwanli-so in North Korea. And there is witness testimony to the effect that they have been held there brutally, tortured, and imprisoned, and may not be alive. It's just calling on our government to try to ascertain if they are indeed still alive and secure their release from that brutal torture and imprisonment.
Are they any relation to the witness that we had?
I don't know if there's any relation to the witnesses we had. It is something that the Council for Human Rights in North Korea in Toronto specifically requested. So they presumably, and there has been a petition drive that has been organized globally in South Korea and around the world with regard to their case and plight.
I'll just wait. You fine with two?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think we've achieved consensus on that one as well. So both the motions are adopted, and with that, we are adjourned.
And again,
hang on, I'm sorry, we're not adjourned yet. Mr. Marsden has something, and so does Mr.
No, I just want to credit Mr. Hebert. I want it on the record that he brought this to our attention, and I want to credit him with that.
Mr. Markey.
I've got a concern here. We're coming up very close to the end of our session. If we want any kind of pronouncement on Camp Ashraf, we're going to have to do it very quickly.
Yes.
And it's very compelling stuff. So whatever we can do to facilitate a response to that, I think, as quickly as we can. And I presume that means Tuesday.
What's that?
I presume that would mean Tuesday.
Tuesday we'll have the witnesses, and then what else we do at that point is at the committee's
Well, if we could
direction.
think in terms prior to Tuesday, what we might want to do, I think it's important.
Okay.
And remember that Obama meeting is December 15th.
That's right. We're
So,
prior to it.
Yeah, prior to it. We have
Any
to
chance
act.
of influence is there.
That's it.
Okay, everybody's heard that, so duly noted. We are adjourned.